Good morning and welcome to the Foggy Dew. This is Colin. Well, gang, are you getting enough news? It is absolutely insane to me how much news comes out on your social media feed. It's like every day we're being like bludgeoned in the face by news. It's just one big story after the other that has like major league impacts, not just on like United States domestic politics, but in the world. And quite frankly, it's hard for me to filter out which stories are worthy of talking about and which ones aren't, because there's just so much news to get into. And to be fair, it would be nice if I could do 5 days a week, but it's just too complicated. So as I'm recording the show, John Sauer is wrapping up the birthright citizenship case at the Supreme Court. He is an absolutely brilliant litigator. The case that he laid out was terrific. So we'll see where that goes. My hopes and prayers are that the birthright citizenship is ended, that illegals are not guaranteed the 14th Amendment, but we'll see where it goes. We're going to have to wait. So, talking about that, I'm also looking at Iran later today. I'm looking at the Artemis program later today. I'll address those things later in the episode. But I guess I'll just go ahead and dive into something that I thought was so crazy. And I read this like on Monday, Tuesday, and I don't normally get stopped in my, legitimately like stopped in my tracks. But I saw something and then I'm like, oh my God, I see where this is going. And I guess the best way to frame this is that in the first Trump administration, they had kind of this off-kilter goal. What they wanted to do in the first Trump administration was to try to reduce animal testing. Animal testing is used over and over again, like in medical and pharma development. And I don't know if you're aware of that or not, like drug companies use monkeys a lot for testing. I'm sure you remember in COVID where they had talked about like Fauci doing stuff with beagles. But using animals for testing purposes for like drug and medical companies, that has been like standard practice for like decades, centuries. I mean, people use animals to test drugs out. And again, animal rights activists hate that type of behavior. There are always ethical questions when you're talking about killing beagles, monkeys, whatever it is. Well, this entire initiative about stopping animal testing or trying to figure out alternative methodologies has persisted into the second Trump administration. So that culminates a couple weeks ago where the FDA ends up putting out this social media post. And apparently now the FDA is looking to try to figure out, quote, alternative testing. Well, so in a parallel post to this thing from the FDA, in a parallel post, the NIH, which is the National Institute for Health, said that it was investing $150 million to develop, quote, animal model alternatives, end quote. Animal model alternatives. Okay, I'll bite. What does that mean? So I'm looking at this and I read this and I'm scratching my head. Animal model alternatives. What does that mean? Well, here you go. Apparently there is a company called R3 Bio. R3 Bio. Well, what does R3 Bio do? Well, R3 Bio is apparently working on these alternatives that the FDA and the NIH are talking about. These people, this R3 Bio company, is working to grow headless bodies. You heard that right. R3 Bio is growing, quote, headless bodies. Headless bodies for drug research. And I am not joking. This is totally real. This is the R3 Bio's main guy. This is their biggest investor. This is some guy named Boyang Wang. Boyang Wang. Here's this guy from R3 Bio. Quote, if we can create a non-sentient headless bodyoid for human beings, that will be a great source of organs. If we can create a non-sentient headless bodyoid for a human being, that will be a great source of organs. Bodyoid. A non-sentient bodyoid. I mean, what? Holy smokes. These are genetically engineered structures they're talking about with no brain. R3 Bio wants these bodyoids for tissue and organ harvesting. And dude, WTF? What? So I'm reading this story and I'm like, this cannot be real. Bodyoids? What are these guys doing? So I looked into it. Well, apparently MIT had looked into this whole thing. Now, to be fair, so MIT looked into this. The company apparently has never cloned anything bigger than a rodent. How comforting. R3 Bio works with monkey cells, not human cells. Now, these bodyoids, not humanoids, these bodyoids, that's just the language here is just insane. These bodyoids would have lungs, kidneys, hearts. They would not have a nervous system. They would have no brain. They would have no pain receptors. And this is the part that blew my mind when I looked into this with the MIT thing. Are you aware of how much money is into animal testing? Meaning the market for animal testing? The animal testing market is a $20 billion market. 20 billion. 20 billion for animal testing. That blows my mind. Well, R3 Bio is going to get you some bodyoids. And look, I read this thing and I'm like, I need some time on this. Because if I'm a person that read sci-fi novels growing up, I mean, to me, that's pretty close to human farming. It made me think of like the Matrix where they have like human bodies in like these tanks. It's like a sci-fi horror story. And again, to be fair, I'm not stupid. I see the benefits of this. I don't want like animals getting hurt and killed and all that stuff. And I know it's humane. So I see the benefits. I get it. But the implications beyond that are profound. And I guess I'm old enough to remember Dolly the sheep. That was back in like what, the mid 90s? I think it was like 1995, 1996. And I guess go one step further. How realistic is it now that we could have Jurassic Park here pretty soon? It's almost like these movies were predictive. It's like AI and the Terminator. It just totally blows my mind. And I guess I look at it another way, like mankind is literally stretching science to prolong life. And I think of it almost like the COVID vaccine. Mankind, I guess, science at this point, just thinks that it can cheat death. There's an easy button to long life powered by science. Imagine the billionaires that are going to get their hooks into this. You could extend a billionaire's life by organ replacement. So you could have some billionaire that drinks their liver black and then they go and buy a new one. Some billionaire that just wants to smoke stogies all day, smokes his lungs black, and then he goes and gets some new lungs from R3 Bio. Don't give me this stuff that they're just going to do it for like medical science and drug development. You know as well as I do, there'll be black market R3 Bios making like bodyoids for billionaires. And I guess that's the question. It's like, where does this go? When I started reading this thing about bodyoids and like organ harvesting, it's almost like nukes. Right? Scientists race to invent something and then it's like, whoops, what did we make? We opened up Pandora's box there. And again, I just thought can we transplant a brain? Like, say you're some 90-year-old billionaire. Can I take the billionaire's brain out and put it in a new bodyoid? Maybe an AI body? Anyway, it's just crazy because this is the bouncing ball of logic. They want to cut down on animal testing. Well, that creates a gap in a market, a $20 billion market. And here comes R3 Bio. And I guess, look, if you're going to do this and regulate it and you're going to have a company like R3 Bio where it's federally regulated or whatever, I guess that's better than a human black market because I'm sure that happens now. You know as well as I do, people with money, if you have some guy it's almost like the Running Man. With Steven, I mean, these people are bankrupt and they'll do anything for their family. So it's like, oh, okay, I'll go ahead and sell a kidney to a billionaire. But I guess reading that whole thing, I'll kind of wrap this up, but it's like, I don't know if you've ever heard a quote by Nikolai Tesla. He had a quote that is so perfect for this. Quote, "You will live to see man-made horrors beyond your comprehension." End quote. And Tesla was right, man. That is just crazy. So switching gears, I wanted to talk about this because it was so pervasive earlier in the week. There was this like flurry of announcements of judicial stays. There were all these judicial stays that came out by liberal judges earlier this week. And I'm just going to say this up front. I find this so tiresome. And I guess let me go through the list. So here you have the White House under construction. They're building this ballroom. Everybody knows about it. Well, here's some liberal federal judge that goes ahead and puts a stay on it. The building is demolished. So there's like a hole in the ground at the White House. They were going to build a $400 million ballroom with no public money. And some judge comes in from the ether, from out of the sky, and says, nope. This judge tells Trump that he needs congressional approval to do this. So now this whole thing has to be litigated. And quite frankly, Trump will win. But I can tell you, like a first-year law student will know that what he's talking, this has nothing to do with Congress. So that's first. You got a judge putting a stay on building a ballroom. So another judge goes ahead and puts a stay on PBS and NPR being shut down. The grounds on which they did it. So the first guy's saying you need congressional approval to do this. So the second judge says, hey, we're going to slow down on shutting down PBS and NPR. And this person claimed the First Amendment. PBS and NPR are publicly funded broadcast centers, publicly funded. That means they use my tax money to fund these things. The First Amendment does not apply here. And even if you back away from that, NPR and PBS were basically defunded anyway by Congress. But I guess the point is that there is no First Amendment right to publicly funded programs. And I would ask another question. There is no enumerated power to even have those programs. Where does the federal government derive the authority to take federal tax money to have these like programs? And again, I said a first-year law student. A first-year law student would know that. And I guess the cherry on top of the treason ice cream sundae here, and I guess, let me give some background. So Joe Biden, when he was facilitating an illegal invasion into this country, Biden took an app that was used for commercial truckers. It's a CB1 app. What he did is he lawlessly converted that into a digital invasion pathway. Again, coming from the people that want no kings. So out of thin air, King Biden decided to use this trucking app for cargo and allowed 900,000 illegals to invade this country using that app. 900,000 illegals that everybody listening, me, my kids, my grandkids, grandkids, they're going to pay for that. And oh, by the way, he had zero legal authority to do that. Where would King Biden derive that authority from to create an app to allow a migration like that into the country? Well, so getting back to this case, Donald Trump correctly revoked their legal status day one. These 900,000 people that came in illegally, he revoked their status. Well, surprise, surprise. Some liberal federal judge doesn't agree with Trump's decision to revoke their status. So some judge who comes out of nowhere that nobody elected thinks that those people are illegal. A federal judge ruled that Donald Trump cannot revoke their legal status. So a judge on their own, a judge who is not elected, just ruled that 900,000 people are automatically citizens of the United States, that Donald Trump cannot revoke their legal status. So just to level set this entire logical sandwich here, it is totally fine and legal for a Democrat president to allow an invasion using a made-up app, but it is therefore illegal for a Republican person to revoke their legal status. Zoom the scope back. You are 4 for 4 on absolute 1,000% judicial tyranny. And the only thing I can tell you about the judicial tyranny which you're witnessing, of the myriad of issues that face our republic, this is the worst. Judicial, and I'm going to get into Judge Jackson here in a minute. Judicial activism is going to destroy the republic. If you have an activist that thinks a trucking act meant for cargo is constitutionally protected to allow an illegal invasion, that is madness. Law schools are churning out activists. They aren't turning out people that are protectors of the republic, that are good arbiters of law. They're churning out radicals who think that feelings override laws. This will be the death of the republic if these people aren't stopped. You cannot have this constant back and forth on judicial activism. It's totally ridiculous. All of these people should be impeached and disbarred. Anyway, I'll be following that whole thing closely. So, switching gears, but this is really a parallel topic. I just said I wanted to talk about Justice Jackson. So, a Supreme Court decision dropped on Tuesday. And to be fair, it's not a big case, but it's noteworthy given the subject that I just talked about. The case itself was called Chili's versus Salazar. Now, this case came out of Colorado. The state of Colorado, put a ban on, quote, conversion therapy in 2019. What that does, basically what that law did, that Colorado law, was try to ban therapists from telling boys they are boys, girls they are girls. Let me give you an example. So if a gender-confused minor goes into a therapist, they walk in and start talking to a therapist, based on that Colorado law, the therapist could not confirm the kid's biological reality. The therapist was restricted from telling a minor that they were a boy. If a biological boy says, quote, hey, I'm gender confused, somebody that would be a Christian therapist, for instance, could not confirm that this kid was a biological boy. Now, this is insane legislation. It's amazing to me, liberal lawmakers that want to restrict speech in this manner. That is on its face a First Amendment issue, especially in medical. And I don't know if Colorado is crazy. Some of the laws that come out of Colorado are absolutely insane. They have way too many crazy people in Colorado now and way too many crazy laws. So I said a Christian therapist. So the bottom line that precipitated this case is that a Christian therapist who has protected speech, especially in medical, so this Christian therapist says, hey, state of Colorado, you can't tell me what to say while I'm practicing healthcare. A state has no ability to tell a therapist, a provider, what to say. They can't limit speech in a medical counseling session. If you prohibit speech, you could therefore be blocking the kid from getting the correct therapy that they need. The patient, the child, must get the correct therapy and not have to worry about what speeches they're allowed to use. And I guess an easier way to think about it is the state of Colorado cannot narrow the clinical pathway by limiting speech, by not allowing the therapist to acknowledge real biology. And I guess, why does this matter? Because to be fair, this whole thing I think is pretty crazy that it even escalated to the Supreme Court. And this is my point. This was an obvious result. A state cannot limit free speech. It cannot limit free speech specifically in healthcare like this. This should have been an obvious 9-0 ruling. That is an obvious limitation on free speech afforded by the Constitution and an easy 9-0 decision, but it wasn't. Judge Jackson, Ketanji Brown Jackson, the DEI Biden justice, dissented on this. So the case was ruled 8-1. So the Colorado law was struck down, is the bottom line here. Even Kagan and Sotomayor thought Colorado overreached here on the First Amendment. Justice Jackson is unfit for the bench. Her dissent in this case was 35 pages of dribble. This lady wrote 35 pages on how it was constitutional to have a state ban speech. Think about that. She wrote 35 pages on how she thought a state should ban speech. And to give you some context, it's not about the length, and it's about the drivel, but the length matters. 35 pages was longer than Gorsuch's majority opinion and Kagan's concurrence combined. How many trees did this lady kill to push her insanity for posterity? 35 pages of unhinged screed. And this lady is constantly doing this. She is a judicial activist. crazy verbal comments in court. She just did it in front of Sauer on the birthright citizenship. She has these insane, crazy written opinions. Coney Barrett has chastised her in writing several times. But here's the killer part to me, especially like when you look at Judge Jackson's opinions. In a prior case, which was U.S. versus Scamretti, Judge Jackson argued that states cannot place bans on gender transitions with minors. So here she is in a prior case arguing that states cannot place bans on gender transitions with minors. But in this particular case, she argues that a state can ban free speech. So to level set, states can't ban gender transitions, but states can ban speech. Here's a quote. This is a quote from her dissent. There is no right to practice medicine which is not subordinate to the power of the states, end quote. She should be disbarred. She should be disbarred. She should be jailed for being a crazy. We need to open up insane asylums again. There is no right to practice medicine which is not subordinate to the power of the states. And I'm sorry, you can drive a truck through that logic. You could drive an 18-wheeler through it. And the funny thing about it is, I talked about Coney Barrett being openly critical of Jackson's dissents. In this case, even Elena Kagan disagreed openly with Jackson. Elena Kagan is a total left-wing lunatic, living document justice. Kagan was appointed by Obama. Elena Kagan even reprimanded Judge Jackson in her concurrence. Elena Kagan said that Jackson failed to acknowledge existing case law. So Jackson is not even acknowledging existing case law. She's not acknowledging existing case law governing free speech in the medical field. Listen to this quote by Kagan. She wrote this in her concurrence. So now you have a second Supreme Court justice chastising Judge Jackson for being an intellectual lightweight. Kagan, quote, Jackson's view rests on reimagining and in that way collapsing the well-settled distinction between viewpoint based and other content-based speech restrictions. And I don't know if it escapes anybody's notice on the left, but Supreme Court justices don't reimagine laws. Their job is to interpret it, not reimagine it. That isn't their role. Kagan continued, quote, because the state has suppressed one side of a debate while aiding the other, the constitutional issue is straightforward. Exactly. Judge Jackson is exactly what I'm talking about, these judicial activists, man. The fact that this lady got elevated to the Supreme Court is embarrassing for the legal profession. I came from a legal family. My grandfather was a judge. He is spinning in his grave with this. My father was an attorney. These guys are spinning in their graves. If they knew this kind of stuff was going on, they should be embarrassed. And anybody in the legal profession should be embarrassed. Any first-year law student, anybody with a passing understanding of law and how our constitutional system works should be embarrassed that this lady is reimagining laws on the Supreme Court. And I guess I'm only going to make one. I'm sorry, this makes me mental. Makes me mental. And I guess I'll make one last point on this whole, like, my own deranged screed about this. So you have this insane case with this insane dissent from Jackson. Here's Gavin Newsom popping up, slithering out from his hole. Gavin Newsom, the legal dunce, weighing in on this ruling on X. Here's Gavin Newsom, the guy that wants to be president. Quote, conversion therapy is discredited junk science that inflicts harm on LGBTQ youth. The Supreme Court decision is disappointing and puts vulnerable kids at risk, end quote. Hey, dude, this was an 8-to-1 free speech issue. It had nothing to do with LGBTQ kids. It had nothing to do with conversion therapy. It's stifling speech in the medical profession. But here's Gavin Newsom slithering out from his hole. It's feelings over laws. And all I can tell you is that is not a leader. And I guess Liberals talk about this all the time. They talk about how Republicans, Donald Trump, that these people are delegitimizing the court. So Gavin Newsom isn't delegitimizing the court by this kind of behavior and talk? Imagine a President Newsom saying something like that and ragging on Supreme Court decisions. And look, Donald Trump does it too. But it's not this idea that liberals and Democrats are just standing on some moral pillar protecting the Constitution is so ridiculous. Anyway, it's just par for the course with a guy like Gavin Newsom. But I'm going to put a bow on all this stuff about the legal profession. But Judge Jackson reimagining the law is absolutely unreal to me. Shame on you, lady. So switching gears, I talk a lot on the show about the SAVE Act and kind of the legal pathway forward, the legal chessboard regarding that. And I guess this week we saw some moves. You are seeing the executive strategy on election integrity playing out in real time. Now, here's Donald Trump, who cut an executive order on Tuesday. And this segment's going to be pretty heavy legal. So just brace yourselves. This is the start of the backup plan to the SAVE Act that I've talked about on the show. The start of it. So really quick, what is the executive order? The executive order is this. DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, and again, I think that this is why the Democrats want DHS defunded, but neither here nor there. So Department of Homeland Security, DHS, will create a list of verified U.S. citizens who are eligible to vote in coordination with the Social Security Administration's help. I've talked about Harmeet Dillon on the show before. She's the Assistant Attorney General. This is precisely why Harmeet Dillon wanted the voter rolls. They want to identify at the federal level verified U.S. citizens eligible to vote via this pathway, meaning mail-in ballots. So what's going to happen here is this, furthermore on the executive order, the USPS, the United States Postal Service, will send absentee ballots to the people on the list that the state provides. The ballots will be in secure envelopes with barcodes. So again, DHS is going to create a list in coordination with the Social Security Administration. USPS is going to send out absentee ballots to the people that are verified on the state lists. And the ballots will be in secure envelopes with barcodes. This is phase one. This is phase one dealing specifically with mail-in ballots. This is not about verifying citizenship. The immediate response to the executive order is that all of the blue swamp creatures across the United States are going to sue. And the minute that the ink was dry on this executive order, they all came out of the woodwork on social media to talk about it. Newsom, Pritzker, Chuck Schumer, and then activists like Mark Elias. But I can promise you this whole thing is going to go to court, which I think is what Trump wants. I've talked about it on the show before. Mail-in balloting with no ID is a central pillar of voter fraud. And again, I said this was going to be heavy on legal. These are a couple points I want you to consider about the executive order. First of all, Trump isn't stupid. He knows this is going to get litigated. The wording on this executive order is very precise. Very precise. Think phase one. There are parts of this that could be upheld. There are parts of it that could be declined. But either which way, the ball is now rolling to secure our elections through executive order. Notice the language here. Notice the language of what he put on this executive order. DHS is now involved in creating state citizenship lists. DHS, Department of Homeland Security. Department of Homeland Security is now being directly involved in securing our elections. What does that mean? That means that national security is now involved. DHS will have oversight over elections moving forward. This order also authorizes the Attorney General to investigate and prosecute illegal balloting. Another point beyond DHS. Because this is the immediate Democrat argument. Elections are state issues. The mail system, however, is the purview of the federal. And if it's federal, that is under the purview of the executive. So this executive order then, therefore, tracks with federal law. Existing federal law, which means that they thought through the language here. Couple other thoughts. The president has plenary authority to protect the country. If the executive determines that a methodology of voting, i.e., mail in balloting, is a provable fraud center, he can act. He doesn't need Congress, he doesn't need the states. If mail in ballots are proven fraud centers, then it is in the president's wheelhouse. Integrity of voting is by definition national security. If you have a porous election for state or federal office, you create lanes for fraud or hostile actors. If you have lanes for fraud and you have lanes for hostile actors, that again is in the president's authority under national security. The thing you got to remember about the Constitution is that each state must guarantee a Republican form of government. If a state has elections that are prone to fraud, then they are not guaranteeing a Republican form of government. That would then create a federal issue under the purview of the executive. So the states, by their own malfeasance here, they're the ones that are causing the issue. This is so brilliantly written. I got a couple other thoughts about this executive order. This executive order cites the National Voter Registration Act, that is existing federal law. That act requires the states to maintain accurate voter rolls. So the states are required to maintain accurate voter rolls. Well, I can promise you that that is not occurring if we have 34 states that won't provide their rolls. Well, what does that mean if you have 34 states that aren't providing the rolls under this act? That means non-compliant states are breaking federal law. And I talked about Harmeet Dillon a minute ago. That's exactly where Harmeet Dillon comes in. This is a chess move. If states haven't given over their voter rolls, you have 34 states plus DC that haven't, then guess what? Those states' mail-in ballots are therefore not eligible. They're not eligible. Those ballots don't matter. If you don't provide the voter rolls, then the ballots you're sending in for these elections are invalid. Trump 1000% has that authority, and that authority is cited in the executive order. And to be clear, there is, in the executive order, I read it, there is no new rule associated here. He didn't create a law. What he's doing is he's demanding that states comply with existing federal law. If a state complies with existing federal law, they get federal funding. That's the other catch here. There is another existing federal law called the Help America Vote Act. That federal act, the Help America Vote Act, is existing federal law that puts certain voting standards on states. That states have clean voter lists, clean balloting. The states are the ones that are in control of the election. They set the time and the place. But the state sets the time and the place, but the states have to act under minimum requirements that are established by federal law, which are all cited in this executive order. That is federal law in the Help America Vote Act that the states are non-compliant with. Again, that other federal law was cited in the executive order. Again, I'll say it again. Trump did not create a new rule here. What he's doing is he's claiming existing federal law. All he's doing with this executive order is holding the states accountable. He's not changing the law. And the other kicker to this is exactly how they're going to do this with fraud. I've talked about this on the show before with like Minnesota. If Minnesota doesn't turn over their bogus books, they're going to get federal money withheld for Medicare and Medicaid. That's how you hold these guys accountable. It's no different than voting, and they even admitted this in the executive order. The states must be compliant with federal law or they end up losing federal money. They have to be compliant with these minimum standards of federal voting. They have to be. That's existing federal law. The federal then can pull states' funding if they're non-compliant. The other thing you got to think about this, the United States postal system, I think I mentioned it a minute ago, the United States postal system is federal. And I guess that's the death blow here. The states must provide accurate rolls, which means that they can't send out their own ballots then using a federal system. They can, but they'd be invalid. And I guess the easiest way to think of a mail-in ballot like a train car. So a state creates a mail-in ballot. That's a train car. Well, that train needs tracks. And the United States postal system is the track. USPS is the federal. So to distill that down into layman's terms, states cannot use the United States Postal Service for non-compliant ballots. So if they're in non-compliance, those ballots are all invalid. Man, this is super interesting. What this also does, if you zoom back away from like the language of the executive order, this also should indicate to everybody listening that Donald Trump knows exactly what the fight is here. He knows the stakes. He knows exactly what's going on here. He knows that if he doesn't win in 26, 28, all the stuff that we talk about on the show, he's going to go to jail. His family's going to go to jail. They're going to impeach him, all the bad things. Border open up again, all the things that you would think would happen if the Democrats got back in control. This is phase one, guys. And again, I've talked about it on the show before. People are so mad, normal people, normal citizens. I talk to people all the time. They are furious at the Senate. Normal people want the SAVE Act. They want to make sure that their vote is protected, that only citizens are voting. You have the Senate just sitting on their hands. The Senate, right? And again, look, even on the Democratic side of the Senate, even Democrats want citizens only voting. So the Senate, regardless of stripe, is totally worthless. I'll put a bow on this. Phase one is mail-in ballots. I would imagine if the SAVE Act doesn't pass, you're going to see another executive order, again, brilliantly written, talking about citizens voting. It's federal law, but this is an opening chess move in a series of moves that's going to secure our elections. And what I guess liberals don't understand is that the executive in our system of government has plenty of authority under national security. Donald Trump can fire an absolute salvo of executive orders that secure our elections. And this was the first one. This was a surgically written executive order. It's using existing federal law, so it's going to withstand scrutiny. And you see the immediate, it's like stimulus response of an amoeba. You see the immediate liberal response. Why wouldn't you want elections secured? The only reason you wouldn't want elections secured is you knew that you were cheating. And of course, what the immediate response? Litigation. They threaten litigation. And look, I was just texting with a friend a little while ago. Donald Trump might not win every one of these battles. I mean, look at birthright citizenship. I think that's going to be close. But again, I think he's writing these executive orders so well that they're going to hold up. But I know for a fact, birthright citizenship, I think they might have him on that. But I think he's got him on election integrity. And I just said it. Opening salvo, I think the next one's citizenship required to vote. And I guess, look, I'm talking about judicial tyranny, all this other stuff. If the United States can secure our elections, maybe we can have a country again. But again, I guess I told everybody on the show for a while now that this was a legal chess game, and Donald Trump was way ahead of it, and there's more moves ahead. We will have secure elections moving forward. One way or the other. Harmeet Dillon, executive order. All of these pieces were in play, and now you're seeing them kind of coming together. But I'm telling you guys what, the next 6 months are going to be absolutely wild in domestic politics. Just enjoy the show. So switching gears, I wanted to talk about a couple things that I just thought was super interesting. So I wanted to start off this segment with the phrase Molon Labe. Now, what does that mean? Where did it come from? Molon Labe is a phrase. That phrase was written by Leonidas I. That's Leonidas of, you might know it from the movie 300, but Leonidas of Sparta had written Molon Labe in correspondence to Xerxes. Well, who was Xerxes? Xerxes was the Persian ruler that he was squared off against. So Leonidas wrote that phrase to Xerxes. He wrote this on the eve of the Battle of Thermopylae. That battle occurred in 480 BC. So Xerxes, the Persian ruler, had ordered Leonidas and Sparta to lay down their arms. Xerxes wanted Sparta to surrender, to lay down their arms, and Leonidas' reply was Molon Labe. Molon Labe means come and take them. The exchange in Greek, if you look at it, was actually written by Plutarch, who I've spoken about on the show before, but the exchange was, here's Xerxes, hand over your arms. Leonidas, come and take them. Well, the end result of this is that Xerxes attacked the next day. Now, and the Spartans actually held Thermopylae for 3 days after that. They held for 3 days. That whole action delayed Persia from advancing on Athens. And again, it's chronicled in 300. That was a tactical loss for Sparta. It was a tactical loss, but a moral victory for Greece and Sparta. Greek forces then ended up defeating Persia 1 year later. But that phrase of Leonidas, of Molon Labe, stood the test of time. It's defiant. It is a military phrase of defiance. And it's specifically about surrender, laying down your arms. Surrender, lay your arms down without a fight. That phrase was actually used in the Revolutionary War. You've probably never heard of this, but there was a place called Fort Morris in Georgia. So here you have the British surrounding Fort Morris in Georgia. So the British surround Fort Morris in 1778. Fort Morris is defended by about 127 colonists, the colonial army. Well, the British force was much larger. It was 200 men plus artillery. So the British commander tells the colonists in Fort Morris to stand down. He tells them to surrender. Well, the colonial army leader was a guy named Colonel McIntosh. The colonial officer sent this response. As to surrendering the fort, come and take it. The British didn't attack the fort. They didn't want any part of that. But I guess that's just one example. That phrase, Molon Labe, or come and take it, is ubiquitous in U.S. history. It was used in the Civil War. It was used in World War I. It was used in World War II. That phrase, Molon Labe, come and take it, the attitude, the defiance behind it is interwoven in U.S. military history. And it has also become inextricably linked with the Second Amendment. And it's interesting to me as a gun owner, a proud gun owner, most gun owners know history very well. Charlton Heston said it best, out of my cold, dead hands. Most patriots, American patriots, understand how vital the Second Amendment is, not just to the United States, but to the entire world. The U.S. citizenry will not give up their guns. It will not happen ever. And I guess you might be asking yourself, what is this? Why is this guy even talking about it? Canada, our friendly neighbors to the north. The socialists, the communists in Canada targeted guns. They've been trying to do this for years. The socialists and communists in Canada, in the parliament, want gun confiscation. And I said it's been going on for a while. This whole issue of gun confiscation started in 2020. Justin Trudeau, who at the time was the prime minister, wanted to ban what he called assault weapons. They started with a list of 1,500 firearms, and it was mainly things that you would think about: AR-15s, Ruger Mini 14s, basically like semi-automatic rifles. And of course, it's always done under historically, when you do gun confiscation, it's always under the pretext of public safety. Well, that list of 1,500 is now expanded. It is now 22,000 firearms are now listed. 22,000. So what they're planning on doing is they want to do this as a gun buyback program. So a voluntary gun buyback program. That's how it starts. So gun owners in Canada had to declare ownership and participation in the program. So they set this whole thing up. They say, hey, you have till March 31st to voluntarily participate in this program. Well, March 31st was just what, Tuesday? So this period of voluntary registration ended March 31st. The period to do it voluntarily was January 19th through March 31st of 2026. So again, just to be clear, a gun owner then was required in Canada to volunteer to give up their guns in that time frame of January 19th to March 31st. Now, I said it was a gun buyback program. So Canada they reserved 900 million to pay these people off. So gun owners that registered, that volunteered for the program, they would hand it over and get money back. Well, the question then you might be asking yourself is, what happens if they don't volunteer? Because they were given a period of time, right? So where we're at now, April 1st, April 2nd, there's an amnesty period. So a citizen could still legally surrender their firearm, but they would have to do it directly to the police. So we're moving out of the voluntary phase now. Well, it's interesting because amnesty on this whole thing ends October 31st, 2026. After, again, this whole thing has been voluntary. After October 31st, 2026, gun possession, civilian gun possession is illegal in Canada. Citizens holding firearms past October 31st face criminal charges. This is how communists operate. It's voluntary for a while and then it's mandatory. Water is wet. Commies always want guns. So last week, there was an exchange in the Canadian Parliament. Now, bear in mind, there are 2 million firearms in Canada. 2 million firearms in Canada. So you have this voluntary period. Are you curious to know the participation rate? As of last week, only 2.5% of those firearms were declared. What that means to the layperson is this, I'll get into this exchange. The Canadian people, the Canadian citizenry that is armed is 97.5% non-compliant with this firearm rule. So they're not even 3% compliant. So here's the exchange. A conservative opposition MP asked, we are at a 2.5% compliance rate. What is the plan come October 31st? That's the question. So when it becomes criminal, what's the plan? Because they never say that. Now, the Minister of Public Safety in Canada is a guy, and I'm going to say this name wrong, and I'm sorry, but his name is Gary Anadasanagiri. This gentleman was born in Sri Lanka, so he's not even a native-born Canadian. But his response to this very simple question, which is what happens October 31st, the Minister of Public Safety said, quote, if people don't give up their guns by October 31st, additional resources would be used, end quote. Well, so the conservative opposition said, what does that even mean? What additional resources are you talking about? This safety minister said that they would be sending retired police and off-duty officers to collect firearms door to door. I'm not a particularly bright person, but if you send people door to door to collect firearms when they obviously don't want to give them over, somebody's going to get killed. I would never send bachelors and come heavily armed yourself because somebody's going to die on a doorstep. I can promise you, you are not going to, no retired Mountie, no retired cop, no off-duty cop is going to walk door to door collecting firearms. Nobody. That is an invitation to get killed on somebody's front lawn. The language here is the language of communism. Collection is voluntary, but compliance is not voluntary. What that means is that compliance is required, says the communists. Because I can tell you this, as a student of political science and a student of history, when a state loses public cooperation, the plan is now force. At 97% non-compliance, this is going to get wild. The citizenry basically just told the government to pound sand. Come and take them. The citizens, the legal firearm owners of Canada just told the state to go pound sand. They told them Molon Labe, come and take them. Castro, Mao, Hitler, Stalin, they went for the guns first. The Redcoats attacked Lexington and Concord first. Why? Lexington and Concord was where the colonists kept their guns. Strip the citizen of their arms, and now the government has a monopoly on force. It is never about safety. It's not about crime. It's about control. Politics flows from the barrel of a gun. And again, read a history book. An unarmed population is compliant to the state. Socialists and communists fear an armed population. This is exactly why our founders wrote the Second Amendment. The founders didn't write the Second Amendment for hunting. In America, the people have the power, right? The people in America have the power. Guns are power. The smallest woman is equal to the strongest man when you talk about firearms. But I just had to laugh. Door-to-door confiscation is the plan now. Door-to-door confiscation. The only thing I can tell you, seizing arms doesn't stop violence, it starts it. And I guess, hey, Canada, the people spoke. You ain't getting the guns. Again, I said it a minute ago. If you send men door-to-door, send bachelors with no kids. But I can promise you, I'll bet any amount of money, progressives in the US are watching this. This is the wet dream of the progressive. And I hope the progressives in America are taking notes. Just for comparison, Canada has about 2 million guns. The US has well over 350 million guns that we know of. Trillions of rounds of ammo. There are more AR-15s than there are F-150s on the road. The British came for our guns. You know what we did? We shot them. I love it. 97% of Canadians stand firm against the government. The private citizen, historically, the private citizen with firearms is the last line of defense. Molon Labe, guys. This American's rooting for you. So one last quick hit. I had a parallel Canadian topic. I think I'm zooming into the longest show ever territory, but I've spoken before about Canada possibly being annexed by the US. And there was news that broke earlier this week that maybe the US won't have to do that. It looks like Alberta might leave Canada. And to be fair, Alberta would be smart to leave. And if you look at Alberta, Alberta is really the driver of the Canadian economy. Alberta creates about 84% of Canadian crude. Alberta creates about 61% of natural gas production in Canada. Alberta has the highest per capita GDP in Canada, about 5 million residents. It borders Montana. It's also very, very conservative. It's the most conservative province. Look at what I just said about the Canadian Parliament. The Canadian Parliament is like totally woke. So you have one province in Alberta that is just diametrically opposed to the policies of the Parliament. Canadian Parliament is like just World Economic Forum garbage. It's gun control, it's climate regulations, greenhouse gas emissions. Well, if you're Alberta, carbon taxes, greenhouse emissions, all of that hurts you the worst if you're the number one producer of Canadian energy. And to be fair, Alberta, if you look at Alberta, the province, Alberta has been the main fighter in Canadian politics against like Trudeau, Carney, Parliament. Alberta is like the last sane province in this like woke communist country. It's like the last appendage that hasn't gone numb. Well, the news I wanted to share is that Alberta is holding a referendum. There is an Alberta separatist movement. That separatist movement wants to have a referendum, a vote on Alberta declaring independence from Canada. That's how sick of it they are. So this referendum, there was a 177,000 signature threshold required to put this up for a vote. So if they got the required amount of signatures, it would be added as a voting item. That 177,000 threshold was met. They blew right by it. But Alberta is now going to have a referendum on secession October 19th of this year. So on October 19th of this year, 2026, citizens of Alberta are going to be able to vote for their independence. And look, now what's going to happen here? If this vote passed, if they voted to secede, if they voted for their own independence, I don't think Canada can allow this. I mean, there would be so many things they'd have to think about: borders, national parks, currency. What does Canada do for oil? There are just a myriad of issues legally. But the Supreme Court of Canada has indicated that a province leaving might be legal. And I guess if we're going to get to this point and they vote for independence, it's very, very possible that the US could get involved. Because the next vote could be that they want to join the US. And look, I guess my only point with this is like, if you look at like an Alberta versus Canada, there are major problems in Canada politically. And it's not dissimilar to what we have here in the States. I mean, you could look at it here, just like our own dynamic with like Texas and Florida don't want to be California and Illinois. And it's almost like we're living in two realities anyway. So I guess if you're Alberta, this is your last chance to do it peacefully. A national divorce is needed, I guess. And to be fair, look, I think a national divorce is needed in the United States a little bit, but how these things are accomplished are really the question, right? But I guess going back to Alberta, if you're an oil producing conservative gun owner, do you want to be ruled by a communist like Trudeau, like Carney? Anyway, I just think it's fascinating to watch, but October 19th will be the referendum vote. And Godspeed, Alberta. Polymarket, if you're curious, Polymarket, the betting site, has it at a 60% chance they leave. We'll see. I'll be following it. Okay, just a couple quick things to kind of wrap the show up for the week. I'm actually recording this before the Artemis launch. Conditions look good for the launch, so I'm assuming they're going to go ahead and fire it up today. It's just super exciting. You know, I just said Godspeed to Alberta. Godspeed to these brave people. It's just a huge moment in human history. I think it's amazing. I'll definitely be watching the launch tonight. And I guess a secondary point to that, I'm also recording this before Donald Trump's national address on Iran. I saw that the mainstream net, like NBC, ABC, they're all preempting their coverage tonight, their scheduled programming. This is going to be a big thing. And the news that I'm seeing right now, again, before he announces it, I'm seeing that Iran wants a ceasefire. And if that's the case, that's good news for the world. And I'm sure that the Trump administration, they'll set conditions here. Hormuz being open, centrifuges not spinning, weapons inspections. And again, hopefully that's the news that Trump comes out with tonight. And if that's accomplished and that's what this is, that's huge. That's just a huge win for the world, for peace. And it's a huge win for Donald Trump. So I guess we'll see. So I guess the last thing I'm going to say, I did have some show news. So I think most people that know that on top of the Foggy Dew, I'm part owner of a Texas-based company. And what that Texas-based company does is we actually sell made in the USA medical products. Part of our company mission is reshoring US manufacturing, and really specifically in medical. Medical supplies are critical to domestic security, which is why I'm so fluent in all this stuff when you talk about national security and Section 232 tariffs. Part of our revenue that we make for the company is given to Folds of Honor. So we support the USA with like jobs here domestically, support local economies. We support USA manufacturing. And then with the Folds of Honor stuff, we also support our veteran community. And normally I can do most of my work out of Missouri. And I guess the show news is that unfortunately I'm going to be traveling more for my other position, like just for like the next month or so. I'll still be recording and writing for the Foggy Dew. I just don't know the cadence of the shows. And it might be that I start bringing my equipment with me on the road, or I'll record over the weekend. It's just so interesting looking at all this stuff and trying to make sure I get good content out. I was first asked to do a podcast back in COVID, back during the school board wars of 22, I guess it was 20 to 22. I was asked to do a podcast. The idea kind of stuck with me. My producer kind of kept pushing me to do this as well. So we launched the Foggy Dew last year in 25. And to be fair, if you're thinking about it, the show keeps growing. But we had made a conscious decision to grow the show organically. We didn't want to bump it. We didn't want to sell the show. We want this to be real. I want to provide real content, real thoughts. I don't want it to be owned. I don't want it to be manipulated. And just so you guys understand, I absolutely love doing the show. Like, doing the Foggy Dew is one of my favorite things to do. So I guess the bottom line is the show isn't going anywhere, but the cadence is going to change like over the next month or so. So I wanted to just get that out there so you weren't like, hey, where's the shows? But I guess bottom line is I sincerely thank everyone that listens, supports us. You guys are what drives the show. So I guess bottom line is just watch for new episodes dropping. And I guess we'll try to communicate like a cadence, maybe on Instagram as well. Next week should be normal, but I guess just bear with us. Appreciate all you guys. And I guess long live the Foggy Dew. We are over an hour, man. Unbelievable. Okay, I'll wrap it up. If you like the show, please go ahead and tell a friend about it. If you would, please follow us on Spotify. You can also follow us on Instagram at Foggy Dew Daily. If you have questions for the show, please go ahead and email us at foggydew95@gmail.com. But in the meantime, I'd ask you to say a prayer, ask questions, and stay vigilant. This is the Foggy Dew signing off.